Nada. She will be giving her presentation right now. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you everyone for being here today. My portion of the presentation will be speaking to you about the social systems in Chiapas that are being affected by the transnational mining concessions. These concessions have ravaged the land, they've displaced families, and they continue to do so at a very alarming rate. So this portion, to be honest with you, was a little difficult for me because I wasn't sure exactly where to start with this presentation. And what I mean by that is that the oppression in Chiapas is so deeply rooted and incredibly multi-layered that there's so many national and international players to this. So my 15 minutes with you today is basically just going to scratch the surface to a much deeper, long-standing colonial legacy that continues to exist. So I also have my notes here that I'll refer to pretty often to keep me from digressing, because I will, and I've been taking Sudafed for the last 2 days, so I definitely will. So please just bear with me. Okay, just like no. So first I want to start my presentation with a few facts about Chiapas. Chiapas is this beautiful place that you see here. As you can see from the map, it is the southernmost state of Mexico. It actually shares a border down here with Guatemala. The state has one of the highest proportions of indigenous people in Mexico at over 30%. It's the 4th highest in the entire country. This picture here is San Cristobal, which is where our home base, so to speak, was. There's many Mayan ruins. This one down here happens to be Palenque, and this is Las Nubes waterfalls. Geographically, Chiapas is filled with mountain ranges, forests, rainforests, highlands. It's a very beautiful place. It is arguably the poorest state in Mexico, although it is the richest in natural resources. One other stark fact about it is that it provides 44.5% of Mexico's hydroelectric power, yet 1/3 of the state does not have access to electricity, if you can believe that. So let's shift gears to the macro level, and with a quick brief background. The mining concessions in Chiapas are the result of a globalized market seeking to fulfill the supply and demand of natural resources. These natural resources include oil and gas, gold, aluminum, silver, iron ore, and most importantly, titanium. Titanium is in huge demand right now by many of the core countries, which is part of the reason why there's so many more concessions now than ever in Chiapas. These concessions are actually made possible by the passing of NAFTA and the ratification of Article 27 of the Mexican Constitution of 1917. That's basically the amendment that deals with the Land Reform Act. So, which brings me actually to the main theme of my presentation, and that is the relationship between the land and the social and cultural systems that exist in Chiapas. So after the Mexican Revolution, the government created these institutions called ejidos. Ejidos are basically shared co-ops. They are a place where communities share the land and they share agricultural rights to the land. So up until 1992, these lands could not be sold. At most, they could only be transferred to other members of ejidos. However, because of that ratification I mentioned earlier to Article 27, these allowed these ejidos to be titled and parceled and sold to third parties. So as a result, there's been many unethical and violent methods to appropriate these lands for those third party contractors, or concessions, I should say, which has ultimately displaced thousands of individuals, leaving them in very dire straits, which is the current social climate in Chiapas. So an important distinction that I'd like to make at this point about the land is the difference in valuation. So for these transnational companies, land is a means to explore, exploit, and extract. That's it. Land is very simply a commodity, and that's what they're doing. They're trying to take as much as they can, where they can. And to the indigenous people, land is very symbolic. It carries with it a spiritual meaning. It's a space for them to come together to conserve their languages, their culture, ancient techniques, ancient knowledge. It's a place where they explore their identities, where they deconstruct the world and understand their place in it. So it is very, very important to them. So it's not just losing part of their self-sustainability and their livelihood, it's losing part of their identity. So one of the main things that is important about the ejidos is, as I mentioned earlier, the agricultural techniques. The indigenous people use very, very old techniques to keep the health of the land and ensure its health for future generations, which is obviously not the case when you come in with a mining company and you have this toxic waste and this leftover mess of dynamite and cyanide solutions. So it's very detrimental. There's also great care taken into safeguarding natural seeds. This is also very important because GMOs are a huge threat right now. There's several regions that are using GMOs in the form of soy in Chiapas, which obviously changes the composition of the food, of the land, and basically the cycle of their cultural legacy. The other part about ejidos that I want to mention is they're very symbolic. They basically demonstrate the cohesiveness and the strength of a collective community. So by titling and parceling these ejidos, you are essentially dissolving their community. You're dissolving their power, their voice, and their ability to continue and sustain their way of life. It's also a platform that communities use to voice their rights to make a decision, and as I said, their self-sustainability. So in the process of extracting minerals, many of these companies are using a cyanide solution to extract gold especially. They use this solution and they run it over the rocks to extract the pure gold, and it leaves behind a cyanide waste. Cyanide is obviously very poisonous. It poisons any water system it comes into contact with, as well as the land, rendering it completely infertile. One of the long-term implications of infertile land is the fact that these indigenous people, where they used to have self-sustainability by creating and cultivating their own food, they're now dependent on the government since they have no land and no way to maintain their autonomy. This is yet another way that individuals are being stripped of their power and they are being dependent on the government, and this entire what they call this monster is basically doing and helping companies, especially big companies, in privatization to occur. So another major side effect of the cyanide leaching process is the rock waste it produces. The rock waste has affected several ecosystems. So in Chiapas, in this picture here in the corner is actually trees called the mangrove trees. They have a beautiful ecosystem, very large, amazing, amazing place that we were fortunate enough to go to. Our guides at this area were telling us that a large portion of these mangroves are being poisoned because of the rock waste that's being dumped into the water supply. This picture down here is actually an open pit mine. There are two types of mining, tunneling and open pit. Open pit is the most detrimental because it creates the most toxic waste. It's basically just tier after tier of basically extracting from the soil and then using dynamite to create smaller pieces to then filter through and get whatever natural resource that they need. It obviously creates a lot of waste. This picture down here is actually titanium. There's many stories that I read of young people in Chiapas that remember rocks such as these in the rivers just there, and it was actually pure titanium. This up here, if you can see, this picture down here is actually a small little inlet of water that is completely poisoned by the cyanide solution. The most important part about the cyanide solution and the other rock waste that I mentioned is that there is an incredible health risk in Chiapas right now with cancer. Cancer is very, very bad there. Everything from throat to liver to stomach cancer in young people who are dying at 17, 18 years old. It is incredibly profound how much the cancer rate has gone up. And we talked to several doctors as well, several medical professionals who are in the process of trying to make awareness for this, but their efforts as well have been thwarted. So the next part that I want to mention is the women's movement. My research in Chiapas focused on the lived experiences of the indigenous women. The Centro de Derechos de la Mujer de Chiapas was one of the organizations that we were able to speak with different indigenous women from various regions of Chiapas. What's interesting is, although they live in several different regions, they all experience the same challenges. So again, so much can be said about this topic alone, but the main issue experienced by the women in Chiapas that I spoke with is their social and political exclusion, specifically as decision makers to the land. So as a result of the patriarchal society that exists in Mexico, women are excluded from voting and participating in the assemblies or the councils that basically are the voice of the ejidos. So what happens is these third parties approach the men, they bid for the land, the men then sell the land, and the women, children, and the elders are displaced, which is very unfortunate because they don't have a voice, they don't have a decision, they're just told that they need to move and they have nowhere to go. After generations of living in the same place, what do you do at that point, right? So there's also a strong correlation between the methods of land appropriation and violence against women, which is yet another issue that is being investigated right now. In response to this, the Centro is committed to supporting women on finding their voice, helping them organize, and then being involved in the political and legislative process. They have understood and they know the value of being involved with the legislative process and what that can do. And so there have been huge efforts to get women and communities involved. So one of the things that I want to read here is that this group, along with two others, just finished a movement tour where they visited several regions in Chiapas. They basically talk to the indigenous people to get an understanding of what are the most grave challenges that they face. So as a result of this, on January 1st of this year, the National Indigenous Council announced that it had created the Indigenous Council of Government. This will serve as the voice for 525 indigenous communities in Mexico. In May, the indigenous government will appoint an indigenous woman as a spokesperson, and she will run in the 2018 presidential elections. So the exact platform that will be presented after the candidate is announced. This is a quote from the CIG, and it says, "The platform will be based on the protection of Mother Nature, fair wages, universal and free healthcare, and public, scientific, and secular education." So currently, they have not selected a candidate yet, but they have announced that it will be an indigenous woman, carefully chosen through a democratic process and extensive consultation with all of the communities. At the end of the conference, the CNI declared that it had decided, quote, "to remove the power that only offers a panorama of death, violence, plunder, and destruction." The last quote that I will read from you from the CNI is that, "We confirm that our fight is not for power. We do not seek it. Rather, we call all of the original peoples and civil society to organize to detain this destruction, to strengthen our resistances and rebellions. That is to say, in the defense of the life of each person, family, collective, community, or neighborhood, to construct peace and justice, reconnecting ourselves from below." So with that, I'm going to conclude my presentation with the same request that we received from the organizations that we visited. And that is, now that you're aware of these issues, the suppression, these injustices, and these disparities, please share it. Share it with anyone who will listen. Share it with anyone who's willing to learn, grow, and expand in hopes that this movement will also grow, build, and ultimately make a difference. Thank you very much.
I just had a quick comment